It's official. We are going to cover and get into the Karen Read trial. Now, some hearings going on right now. The actual court date isn't until April, or the actual start of the retrial isn't until April. Before we actually get into what's going on right now with Karen Read, I want to give you guys an update, and I want to tell you a little bit of background on what happened with Karen Read, why she's in this situation in the first place, and what's going on right now. So I took a couple notes. I'm going to read these to y'all real quick, and then we'll get into the updates from NBC News here in Boston in a second. So Karen Read, as we know, she's in Massachusetts, out there in Boston, and her boyfriend, John O'Keefe, was a Boston police officer, right? So the prosecutors allege that after a night out, she accidentally hit O'Keefe, her boyfriend, with her car while dropping him off at a friend's house during a snowstorm, and left the scene, leading to his death from his injuries and hypothermia. In her first trial, here's what happened. It began on April 20th or April 2024. So April of last year, the prosecution presented evidence suggesting that Reed's vehicle struck O'Keefe, her boyfriend, pointing to the damage on her car and his injuries. However, Reed's defense argued that she was innocent, claiming that O'Keefe was injured inside the house during a fight and that there was a cover up by the police officers to protect the real perpetrators. Uh-oh. And this is why you see a lot of people saying free Karen Read. Again, it seems to be the case of wrong place, wrong time. And it's interesting because the Boston Police Department does not have the best reputation. So we're going to get into it. After weeks of testimony, the jury was unable to reach a unanimous decision, resulting in a mistrial in July. This means they couldn't agree whether Karen Read was guilty or not guilty. On March 2025, a retrial is rescheduled to begin in April. As we know, both the prosecution and the defense are preparing to present their cases again. Recently, the state's highest court ruled that Read can be retrialed on all previous charges, rejecting the claims that doing so would violate protections against double jeopardy, which prevents someone from being tried twice for the same crime. The upcoming trial will revisit the evidence and the arguments to determine Reed's involvement in O'Keefe's death. So with that being said, let's go ahead and see what NBC News is saying and what really went down in this case. Y'all let me know what you think about this. Like the video on your way in.
We know this case has caught the attention of people from New England and beyond. And tonight we are hearing from a juror from Reed's first trial.
And we should note that this is the first on-camera TV interview that any member of the jury has done. And he spoke with our Eli Rosenberg in a story that you will only see again right here on NBC 10 Boston.
Kind of overwhelming at first, and then it got very interesting, and then at the end, kind of disappointing.
You had this front row seat. What do people not understand?
It's difficult for some of the public to understand why we arrived somehow to our conclusion, but it was totally based on the evidence that was provided to us and that we could actually consider.
At the time, there were a couple things during the trial that were a huge deal as it happened on the outside. And I'm wondering, did it resonate with you? One being the testimony of Michael Proctor, the lead investigator, and those texts.
It was very surprising. It was very unprofessional. And at that point, most likely we would discredit or not consider his testimony as strong.
Another big thing was this Google search. How's long to die in the cold?
We didn't believe that there was enough evidence or expertise to kind of indicate that it was reliable. It did not appear, at least to myself, that she intended to commit murder. The other piece, which was the leaving a scene of an accident, also did not appear very clear, and therefore everybody voted for those two charges as not guilty. That second charge, that was the one that was very debated in terms of whether ultimately she did it became questionable. And now that is where there was reasonable doubt in some minds. Unfortunately, we didn't get clarification early on that we could look at each charge individually and independently.
So that's interesting. I guess this is where the issue of double jeopardy plays in, because if they found her not guilty on two of the other charges, then maybe the defense could have a case for double jeopardy there. Very interesting.
That we could look at each charge individually and independently of each other. If we had done that, then I don't know where we would be or if we would be talking today.
Do you think
Probably
there was
not.
going to ever be resolution on that second charge?
I honestly believe that there would not have been any resolution because some people had very good arguments, and at that point it was just trying to convince people and change people's beliefs, which would not be possible.
And this was interesting
Very
as
interesting.
well. After spending so much time together, the 9-week trial, the deliberations, eating lunch together every single day, this jury still talks all these months later. They have a group chat, they share texts, and Ronald says he will be watching some of Karen Read's second trial. He wishes those jurors all the luck. In Boston, Eli Rosenberg, NBC 10 Boston.
All right, so let's get into the double jeopardy issue and see what's going on there.
Doug, at this hour, Karen Read is now at her second courthouse of the day. After starting the morning here at federal court for an appeals hearing, she's now back at Norfolk Superior Court in Dedham for pretrial motions. Read and her defense attorneys are seen here arriving here at federal court this morning. During a hearing that lasted a little over an hour and a half, Chief Judge Dennis Saylor heard arguments about whether the trial judge, Beverly Cannoni, properly declared a mistrial back on July 1st and whether she should have pulled the jury. Karen Read's attorneys argue, based on contact with jurors after the trial, that the jury did in fact reach a unanimous verdict that Read is not guilty of second-degree murder for the death of her boyfriend, John O'Keefe, and not guilty of leaving the scene of an accident with death resulting. Therefore, they argue, retrying her would violate her constitutional protection against double jeopardy.
That makes sense.
We had a lengthy argument in front of the Chief Judge of the United States District Court on issues of what we contend to be profound constitutional significance, which is whether or not the Norfolk DA could re-prosecute Miss Read when there's such strong and compelling evidence that the prior jury acquitted her. Of course.
The attorney representing the Norfolk County DA's office points out that the jury did not fill out the verdict slips, nor did the jury indicate a partial verdict in any notes to Judge Cannoni, telling the judge in court here at federal court this morning there were no acquittals, and if the Commonwealth were to argue they found her guilty, there was no question Miss Read would strenuously object. Read already lost this fight at the SJC. There is a great deal of urgency to these proceedings because bear in mind that whatever Judge Saylor decides, he admitted from the bench today, will likely be appealed or could very well be appealed, and that could have a bearing on the trial, the upcoming retrial of Karen Read, which as of now is scheduled to begin on April 1st. Reporting live at federal court in the Seaport, Todd Kiskevich, WCVB News Center 5.
Yeah, that's interesting. I want to know what y'all think about that moving forward. Do you think if they appeal that this could possibly happen? Because I could see how they're making a case for the double jeopardy, especially with, as we heard from a juror, they're saying, yeah, it would have been not guilty on 2 of those charges. It's just that last one we weren't too sure about. Moving forward into the next jury, it'll be interesting to see what happens here.